The train whistle split through the mountain air like a lover's final goodbye, and Violet Delaney pressed her palm against the cold window glass, watching the remote settlement of Alta, Utah materialize through the pine-covered slopes as though conjured from desperation itself. The year was 1878, and she carried everything she owned in a single leather trunk, her nimble fingers raw from the journey east from San Francisco, where scandal had chased her from the only seamstress shop that would hire a woman with her particular history. The conductor called out their arrival with the disinterest of a man who had seen too many hopeful souls step off into the unforgiving mountain territory, and Violet smoothed down her traveling dress, the deep blue fabric worn but impeccably mended, each stitch a testament to the skill that would either save her or leave her stranded in this silver mining town, perched precariously in the Wasatch Mountains. Alta sprawled before her like a promise half-kept, wooden buildings clinging to the steep canyon walls, their foundations built on hope and silver ore. The November wind carried the sharp bite of coming snow, and Violet shivered despite her wool coat as she descended the train steps, her boots touching the packed earth of the platform. Around her, miners and merchants moved with purpose, their faces weathered by altitude and ambition. She stood there, trunk at her feet, scanning the rough street for any sign of a dress shop or tailor, anything that might offer employment to a woman whose letters of inquiry had gone unanswered for 3 long weeks. "You look lost, miss." The voice came from beside the platform, deep and measured, carrying an accent that spoke of Texas plains rather than Utah mountains. Violet turned to find a man watching her from beneath the brim of a sand-colored hat, his frame tall and lean in the way of men who spent their lives in the saddle rather than underground chasing silver. His face was handsome in a rugged fashion, weathered by sun and wind, with dark eyes that held something she could not immediately place. Sorrow, perhaps, or loneliness so deep it had carved permanent lines beside his mouth. "I am looking for work," Violet said, lifting her chin with the pride that had sustained her through worse moments than this. "I am a seamstress, a good one. Is there a dress shop in town that might need skilled hands?" The man stepped closer, and she noticed he moved with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. His clothes were well made but worn, a leather vest over a cotton shirt that had been mended multiple times, though the stitching was uneven and clumsy. "The only seamstress we had left on the morning train 2 days ago. Married a merchant from Salt Lake City and did not look back." He studied her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable but somehow did not. "My name is Harrison Xavier. I run a ranch about 5 miles up the canyon. Not many cattle, mostly horses for the mining operations. It is not much, but it is honest work. I do not see what your ranch has to do with my need for employment, Mr. Xavier." Violet kept her voice steady, though her heart was beginning to sink. If the only seamstress had departed, finding work would be far more difficult than she had anticipated. Harrison removed his hat, revealing dark hair touched with premature gray at the temples. "What I mean to say, Miss Delaney, Violet Delaney, Miss Delaney. What I mean to say is that I have a proposal, though it might sound strange coming from a man you have just met." He turned the hat in his hands, and Violet noticed his fingers were long and scarred, the hands of someone who worked hard for everything he possessed. "The town needs a seamstress. The miners need their clothes mended, and the few families here are desperate for someone who can make proper dresses and shirts. But Alta is not an easy place. The winter comes hard and fast, and we are often snowed in for weeks at a time. You would need a place to stay, somewhere safe and warm." "I have some money saved," Violet said, though the coins in her reticule would barely cover a week at a boarding house, let alone the winter months ahead. I am not asking for money." Harrison's dark eyes met hers, and she saw that sorrow again, deeper now, a wound that had never properly healed. "I am asking if you would consider an arrangement. My ranch house is large, far too large for one man. It has a room that would be perfect for sewing with good light from the southern windows. I could provide lodging and meals, and in return, you could mend what needs mending. My clothes, the ranch hand's gear, anything that requires a skilled hand. You could use the room to work for the town as well, keep whatever money you earn from other customers. It would give you a place to establish yourself, to build a clientele through the winter." Violet studied him carefully, looking for any sign of the predatory interest she had learned to recognize in men. But Harrison Xavier's face showed only earnest hope, as though he expected her to refuse and was bracing himself for the disappointment. "That is a generous offer, Mr. Xavier." "Too generous. What is it you are not telling me?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first warmth she had seen from him. "You are right to be cautious. The truth is, Miss Delaney, that my house is too quiet. It has been too quiet for 3 years now, since my wife died bringing our daughter into the world. The baby died 2 days later. I have been alone since then, except for the ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse. I am not proposing anything improper. I am simply saying that a house that size should have life in it again, voices and purpose. And I do need someone who can mend more than just torn fabric." The last words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Violet felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of shared pain. She had her own sorrows, her own losses that had driven her west and then east again, always searching for a place where the past could not find her. "You are asking me to mend your heart while you provide everything else." "I suppose I am." Harrison replaced his hat, his expression guarded once more. "Though I have no right to ask such a thing from a stranger. Forget I said anything. There is a boarding house 2 streets over, run by Mrs. Chen. She is fair and honest, and she might know of work opportunities in town." Violet looked at her trunk, at the town spread before her with its rough edges and uncertain future, at the mountains rising steep and unforgiving on all sides. She thought of the long winter ahead, of trying to establish herself in a place where she knew no one, where every door might close before she could prove her worth. And she thought of the man before her, who had been honest about his loneliness, who had not tried to hide his pain behind false cheer or predatory intent. "I will accept your offer, Mr. Xavier," she said, making the decision with the same swift certainty that had carried her through every turning point in her life. "On the condition that we establish clear boundaries and expectations. I will have my own room with a lock on the door. I will take my meals separately unless invited to join you. And I will pay you 20% of whatever I earn from town customers as rent, once I have established my business." Harrison's surprise was evident, followed by something that looked almost like relief. "Those terms are more than fair, Miss Delaney. I will have Frank, my foreman, bring the wagon around. We can load your trunk and be at the ranch before dark. The hands will be in the bunkhouse for supper, so you will have privacy to settle in." As he walked away to fetch the wagon, Violet allowed herself a long breath, wondering if she had just made the wisest decision of her life or the most foolish. But the train had already departed, carrying away any chance of retreat, and the November wind was growing colder by the minute. Sometimes survival meant trusting in the strange kindness of strangers, in the possibility that loneliness recognized in another might be the beginning of something neither had dared to hope for. The wagon ride up the canyon was both breathtaking and terrifying. The road narrow and winding, cut into the mountainside with steep drops on one side and sheer rock on the other. Harrison drove with practiced ease, the horses responding to his quiet commands as though they understood not just the words but the intention behind them. Violet clutched the edge of the wooden seat, trying not to look down at the canyon floor far below, where a creek rushed over stones smoothed by centuries of mountain runoff. "It gets easier," Harrison said, noticing her white knuckles. "The road, I mean. After the first few times, you stop imagining all the ways you could tumble down the mountainside and just trust that the horses know what they are doing." "How comforting," Violet managed, and was rewarded with a low chuckle, the first genuine sound of amusement she had heard from him. The sound did something unexpected to her chest, warming it in a way that had nothing to do with the wool blanket he had draped over their laps against the cold. "I bought the ranch 7 years ago," Harrison said as they rounded a bend and the canyon opened up slightly, revealing a broad meadow nestled between the peaks. "Everyone said I was crazy, that no one could make a living this far up, especially not with horses when the silver mines were booming. But I had saved my wages from cattle drives and I knew horses. The ranches down in the valley were already crowded and I wanted something that was mine alone." "And your wife," Violet asked gently, "did she come from Texas with you?" "No. I met Alina here in Alta. She was the daughter of a Mexican miner who had come north looking for work, beautiful and fierce, with a laugh that could make you forget winter was coming." His voice softened with memory, not bitter but wistful. "We had 3 good years together. She loved the ranch, loved the mountains. When she got pregnant, we were so happy. We had already picked out names, made plans for adding rooms to the house for all the children we would have." He fell silent, and Violet did not press. She understood that some stories did not need to be finished aloud, that the silence itself spoke volumes about the loss that followed. The ranch house appeared as they crested a final rise, and Violet caught her breath despite herself. It was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure built of timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The setting sun painted the wood golden, and smoke rose from the chimney in a steady stream. Behind the house, she could see the barn and corrals, several horses grazing in the meadow, and beyond that, a smaller building that must be the bunkhouse Harrison had mentioned. "It is beautiful," Violet said honestly. "You built all this, with help from the hands and some men from town." "Alina designed the porch. She said a house in the mountains needed places to sit and watch the weather come through." Harrison guided the wagon toward the front of the house, pulling the horses to a stop. "She was right. I have seen storms from that porch that would make you believe in God and question Him in the same breath." He climbed down and came around to help Violet, his hands firm and steady at her waist as he lifted her to the ground. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of him against the cold mountain air. Then he stepped back, reaching for her trunk as though the moment had not happened, and Violet followed him up the porch steps, her heart beating faster than the altitude alone could explain. The interior of the house matched the exterior in its unexpected refinement. The main room was large and open, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and comfortable furniture arranged to take advantage of the heat. A kitchen area occupied the back corner, with a proper stove and a table big enough to seat 6. A staircase led to the second floor, the railing carved with simple but elegant designs. "The hands built that railing," Harrison said, noticing her attention. "They worked on it during the winter months when we were snowed in. Said they needed something to do with their hands besides play cards and drink." He carried her trunk toward the stairs. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. It has the best southern exposure like I mentioned." My room is at the end of the hall, and there is a spare room that I use for storage. The washroom is between them, with a pump that draws from the well. It is cold in winter, I will not lie, but it works. Violet followed him up the stairs, acutely aware of being alone in this house with a man she had met less than 2 hours ago. But Harrison moved with careful propriety, setting her trunk inside the room and then stepping back into the hallway immediately. "I will let you get settled," he said. "Supper is usually around 7. You are welcome to join me, or I can bring a plate up to you if you would prefer privacy tonight. I imagine the journey was tiring." "I will join you," Violet decided. "It would be rude to accept your hospitality and then hide in my room like a frightened child. Besides, we should discuss the practical details of this arrangement." Something flickered across Harrison's face, too quick to interpret. "Then I will see you at 7. There is a lock on the inside of the door, as promised. Use it if it makes you feel safer." He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the stairs. Violet closed the door and leaned against it, surveying the room that would be her home for the foreseeable future. It was larger than she had expected, with the promised southern windows letting in the last of the day's light. A bed stood against one wall, neatly made with a quilt that looked handmade, the stitching even and careful. A dresser, a washstand, and a large table beneath the windows completed the furnishings. The table was empty and clean, perfect for laying out fabric and patterns. She opened her trunk and began unpacking, hanging her few dresses in the small closet, arranging her sewing supplies on the table. Needles and thread, scissors and pins, the precious measuring tape that had been her mother's, the thimble worn smooth by years of use. These were her tools, her means of survival, and seeing them laid out in this new space steadied her nerves. Whatever happened, she had her skill, and that was something no one could take from her. By the time she descended the stairs at 7, the smell of cooking meat and onions filled the house. Harrison stood at the stove, surprisingly domestic as he stirred something in a large pot. He had removed his hat and vest, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with more scars. "I am not much of a cook," he admitted as she approached. "But I can manage stew without poisoning anyone. There is bread from Mrs. Chen's boarding house, only a day old, and I have butter from the Johnsons' dairy down in the valley." "It smells wonderful," Violet said honestly. "May I help with anything? You could set the table." "Dishes are in that cabinet, and the cutlery is in the drawer beneath." They worked in comfortable silence, falling into a rhythm that felt strangely natural. When the meal was ready, Harrison ladled generous portions into bowls, and they sat across from each other at the large table, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Tell me about your sewing," Harrison said after they had eaten for a few minutes. "How did you learn?" Violet considered how much to share, how much of her past to reveal to this man who was still essentially a stranger. "My mother was a seamstress in Boston. She worked for wealthy families, making ball gowns and traveling dresses. I grew up watching her transform fabric into art. She taught me everything, every stitch and technique, every way to hide a flaw or enhance a figure. When she died, I was 16. I took over her clients, but Boston society has rigid rules about who is acceptable and who is not. Eventually, those rules made it impossible for me to continue there." "What rules did you break?" Harrison's question was gentle, not prying. "I fell in love with someone I should not have. The son of one of my mother's best clients. He promised me everything, and I believed him. When I became pregnant, he disappeared, and his family made sure everyone knew I was ruined." Violet kept her voice steady, though the old pain still had edges. "I lost the baby at 5 months. The shame of it, the stress, it was too much. After that, no one would hire me. I went west to San Francisco, worked in a factory for a year until I had enough saved to set up my own shop. But the past followed me. Someone from Boston recognized me, spread the story. I had to leave again. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. People can be cruel, especially when they are afraid of their own secrets being revealed. I am sorry you went through that. No one should be judged so harshly for loving the wrong person. And yet it happens every day. Violet met his gaze directly. I am telling you this because you deserve to know who you have invited into your home. If my past becomes known in Alta, it could reflect poorly on you. I would understand if you wanted to reconsider our arrangement. Miss Delaney, I lost my wife and daughter 3 years ago. I watched Alina suffer for 18 hours before the midwife finally said there was nothing more to be done, that we had to choose between her and the baby. Alina made the choice herself. She said to save the child that a baby deserved its chance at life. But the baby was too small, too weak. She died in my arms while I was still trying to understand that Alina was gone. He paused, his jaw tight with remembered anguish. After that, the ranch hands tiptoed around me for months, and the people in town looked at me with pity I did not want. Everyone had an opinion about my grief, about how I should move on or keep mourning or start courting again. So I understand something about being judged, about having your private pain become public knowledge. Your past does not frighten me, and it changes nothing about our arrangement. Violet felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unbidden. Thank you, she managed. That means more than you know. They finished the meal in a different kind of silence, one built on shared understanding rather than uncertain courtesy. When Violet offered to wash the dishes, Harrison did not protest, instead standing beside her to dry and put them away. Their hands brushed occasionally, small touches that sent unexpected warmth through Violet's veins. I should warn you, Harrison said as they finished. The hands will be curious about you. Frank, the foreman, is solid and trustworthy. But Tommy is young and tends to get ideas, and Pete can be rough around the edges. If any of them make you uncomfortable, you tell me immediately. I have dealt with unwanted attention before, Mr. Xavier. I can handle a few curious ranch hands. Harrison, he corrected. If we are going to be living under the same roof, you should call me Harrison. Mr. Xavier makes me feel like my father, and that is not a comfortable feeling. Then you must call me Violet. Miss Delaney sounds like a school teacher, which I most certainly am not. His smile was genuine this time, transforming his face into something younger and less burdened. Violet suits you. It is a strong name, not fragile like people think violets are. The mountain violets here bloom in the snow sometimes, pushing up through frozen ground like they are determined to prove winter wrong. I like that image, Violet said softly. Being determined enough to prove winter wrong. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed with moonlight streaming through the southern windows, Violet thought about the unexpected turn her life had taken. She had come to Alta expecting to struggle, to fight for every opportunity, to spend the winter alone and uncertain. Instead, she had found herself in a beautiful house with a man who understood loss and loneliness, who asked only that she mend what was torn and broken, starting perhaps with hearts that had both been damaged by circumstances beyond their control. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crystalline mountain morning that made everything seem possible. Violet woke to the sound of men's voices outside, the ranch coming to life with the workday. She dressed quickly in her simplest work dress, pinning her dark hair into a practical bun, and descended the stairs to find Harrison already gone. A note on the table explaining that he had morning chores but would return by 9 to introduce her to the hands, and take her into town to spread word about her services. She found bread and jam in the kitchen, made herself tea from the kettle Harrison had left warming on the stove, and ate breakfast while watching the mountains change colors as the sun climbed higher. The view from the kitchen windows was spectacular, the peaks still snow-capped despite it being early November, the aspens on the lower slopes blazing gold against the evergreens. Harrison returned precisely at 9, stamping snow from his boots on the porch. His face was wind-burned and bright, his breath misting in the cold air that swept in with him. Ready to meet the crew and brave Alta society, as ready as I will ever be, Violet said, reaching for her coat. The 3 ranch hands were waiting by the barn, clearly curious but trying to appear casual. Frank proved to be a grizzled man in his 50s, weathered and solid, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. Tommy was indeed young, probably not yet 20, with an eager puppyish quality that made Violet think of an oversized golden retriever. Pete was harder to read, lean and watchful, with scars on his hands that spoke of a rough past. "Gentlemen, this is Miss Violet Delaney," Harrison said formally. "She is a seamstress who will be using the spare room upstairs as her workspace. She will be taking on mending for the ranch and for town customers. I expect you all to treat her with respect and to spread the word in Alta that we finally have someone who can fix more than just horse tack." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Delaney," Frank said, removing his hat. "I've got 3 shirts that need buttons and one with a tear that keeps getting worse. Would you have time to look at them?" "Of course," Violet said warmly. "Bring them by whenever it is convenient and I will work up a price for you." Tommy stepped forward eagerly. "I've got a good vest that got caught on barbed wire. My mom made it for me before I left home and I would really like to save it if possible." "I will do my best," Violet promised. "Barbed wire can be tricky, but I have mended worse." Even Pete nodded grudgingly. "Might have some things that need looking at. Been making do with rough work, but it would be nice to have proper mending again." The ride into Alta revealed a town coming alive with morning activity. The mines were already working, the sound of drilling and blasting echoing through the canyon. Miners on the night shift trudged toward their cabins, while the day shift headed up the mountain with lunch pails and determined expressions. Harrison guided the wagon to a central location near the general store, helping Violet down with the same careful propriety he had shown from the beginning. "The best way to spread word is to start with Mrs. Chen," he explained. "She knows everyone and everything in Alta. If she approves of you, half the town will be lining up at the ranch by tomorrow." Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a tidy 2-story building with cheerful yellow curtains in the windows. The proprietress herself was a petite Chinese woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She looked Violet up and down with frank assessment when Harrison made the introductions. "So, you are the seamstress Harrison has been telling me about, Mrs. Chen said, her English flawless despite a slight accent. "We have been needing someone since Mary left. Can you do alterations as well as mending?" "Yes, madam. I can also make dresses, shirts, and trousers from scratch if someone provides the fabric. I worked in Boston and San Francisco before coming here." "Big cities," Mrs. Chen observed. "Alta must seem very small to you, very rough." "Alta seems like an opportunity," Violet said honestly. "A chance to build something lasting in a place that needs my skills." Mrs. Chen's stern expression softened slightly. "You have a practical head on your shoulders. That is good. Mountain living is not for dreamers and delicate flowers. Come inside. I will make tea and we will discuss business. Harrison, you can wait here or come back in an hour." "I will wait," Harrison said, settling onto one of the porch chairs. Violet is new to town. She might want a familiar face nearby. Inside, Mrs. Chen's parlor was warm and immaculate, furnished with an eclectic mix of Chinese and American pieces that somehow worked together harmoniously. She poured tea from a delicate pot painted with birds and flowers, serving it in cups so thin Violet could almost see through them. "I came to Alta 15 years ago," Mrs. Chen said without preamble. "My husband worked in the mines until a collapse killed him and 6 other men. I could have returned to San Francisco, back to my family, but I chose to stay. I bought this building and made it into something respectable, a place where men could get a clean bed and decent food without any nonsense. You know why I tell you this? Because you want me to understand that women can survive here alone," Violet guessed. "Partly. But also because I want you to know that Alta judges on different terms than big cities. Here, no one cares much about your past as long as you work hard and deal honestly. We have miners from every country, merchants from every background, women who came west for every reason you can imagine. What matters is what you do now, not what you did before." She sipped her tea delicately. "Harrison Xavier is a good man. Tragic what happened to his wife, and he has been alone too long, but he is honorable. If he has offered you his home, it is because he genuinely wants to help, not because he expects something improper in return." "I believe that," Violet said. "He has been nothing but respectful. Good. Then we understand each other. Now for business. I have 5 regular boarders and numerous temporary guests. They all need mending, buttons replaced, tiers fixed. Some of them are hard on their clothes and will keep you busy. I also know several families in town who will be thrilled to have access to a skilled seamstress. Mrs. Johnson, the dairy woman, has 3 daughters who are growing like weeds and constantly need their dresses let out. Mr. Patterson at the general store will want to know if you can make men's shirts to sell in his shop. And the Silver King mine supervisor, Mr. Thornton, has a wife who fancies herself quite fashionable despite living at 8,000 feet elevation." By the time Violet left Mrs. Chen's boarding house an hour later, she had a notebook full of names and potential customers, plus a bundle of mending from Mrs. Chen's boarders that would keep her busy for several days. Harrison helped her load everything into the wagon, his expression pleased. "Mrs. Chen likes you," he observed as they headed back toward the ranch. "That is no small accomplishment. She has run off 3 potential seamstresses in the past year alone, said they were too flighty or too full of themselves to make it through a mountain winter." "She is formidable," Violet agreed. "But fair. I appreciate that. I would rather know exactly where I stand than deal with false pleasantries." "You will fit in here," Harrison said with certainty. "Alta needs practical people who are not afraid of hard work and cold weather. You seem to be both." Over the following weeks, Violet established herself with a speed that surprised even her. The room Harrison had provided proved perfect for her needs, the southern light strong and steady even as November deepened toward December. She worked long hours, mending torn shirts and worn trousers, replacing buttons and reinforcing seams, altering dresses and letting out waistbands. The miners paid promptly, often adding a little extra when they were particularly pleased with her work. The families in town began to trust her with more complex projects, asking her to make new dresses for Christmas celebrations or to refashion older garments into something more current. Harrison kept his distance, respectful of the boundaries they had established, but Violet found herself seeking his company more often as the days passed. They fell into a comfortable routine of shared evening meals, trading stories about their days, discussing everything from mountain weather to the political situation back east. Harrison proved to be well-read and thoughtful, his years of solitude spent not in idleness, but in study and reflection. He had books in every room, eclectic collections ranging from philosophy to poetry, from agricultural techniques to history. Alina loved books, he explained when Violet commented on his library. She taught me to love them too. Before I met her, I thought reading was something rich people did to avoid real work. But she showed me that books were doorways to places I would never see, ideas I would never encounter otherwise. After she died, I kept reading because it made me feel close to her, like we were still having conversations across some divide I could not see. Violet found herself sharing more of her own story, the details she usually kept locked away. She told Harrison about her mother's gentle hands and infinite patience, about the joy of creating something beautiful from raw fabric, about the boy she had loved who had promised her the world, and then vanished when that world became complicated. Harrison listened without judgment, his dark eyes attentive and understanding. "You ever regret it?" he asked one evening as they sat by the fire, the December wind howling outside. "Loving him, even though it cost you so much?" Violet considered the question carefully. "I regret trusting him. I regret believing his promises without questioning whether he had the strength to keep them. But I do not regret the loving itself. For a few months, I was happy in a way I had never been before. That happiness was real, even if everything else was a lie. And the baby, even though I lost her, she was real too. I felt her move inside me. I talked to her and made plans for her. That mattered, even though it ended in grief." Harrison's voice was soft. "I do not know for certain, but I always felt like she was a girl. I had named her Rose after my mother. When she died, the doctor said it was probably for the best, that a child born from scandal would have had a hard life." Violet's throat tightened. "But I wanted her anyway. I would have loved her enough to make up for the hardship." Harrison reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "I believe you, and for what it is worth, I think Rose would have been lucky to have you as her mother." The touch of his hand sent warmth flooding through Violet's chest, a feeling she had thought lost to her forever. She looked at their joined hands, his scarred and work-roughened, hers needle-marked and stained with thread dye, and thought how they matched in their imperfections. "Tell me about your daughter," she said gently. "What was her name, Lily?" Harrison's voice broke slightly on the word. She was so small, barely 5 pounds, dark hair like Alina's, and when she opened her eyes they were blue, though the midwife said they might have changed. "She lived for 2 days. I held her almost the entire time, trying to will my strength into her, but it was not enough. She died at dawn on the 3rd day after her birth, just as the sun was coming up over the mountains. I buried her next to Alina, up on the hill where you can see the whole valley. Sometimes I go up there and tell them about the ranch, about the horses, about anything I think they might want to know." Violet squeezed his hand, unable to find words adequate to the depth of his loss. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, the fire burning low. 2 people who had each lost so much finding unexpected comfort in shared silence. The first major snowstorm hit in mid-December, exactly as Harrison had predicted. Violet woke to find the world transformed. Snow piled 3 feet deep on the porch, drifts reaching halfway up the ground floor windows. The wind shrieked around the house like something alive, and when she looked out her workroom windows, she could barely see the barn through the whiteout conditions. Harrison appeared at her door shortly after dawn, his expression serious. "The storm is going to last at least 2 days, maybe 3. We are snowed in completely. The road down to town is impassable, and even getting to the bunkhouse is dangerous. I am bringing the hands into the main house. They can sleep down in the main room by the fire. I did not want you to be alarmed when you heard them coming in." "Of course," Violet said immediately. "Should I help prepare food? If we are going to be feeding 5 people for several days, we will need to organize the kitchen." "I would appreciate that." Harrison's relief was evident. Frank is good at planning, and Pete is surprisingly decent at making biscuits, but having someone coordinate would make everything easier. The next 3 days tested everyone's patience and creativity. The 5 of them were trapped inside the house while the storm raged, snow piling higher by the hour, wind battering the walls like a living thing determined to find entry. But instead of tension, Violet found an unexpected camaraderie developing. Frank shared stories of his years as a trail guide, adventures that seemed barely possible but which he swore were completely true. Tommy revealed a talent for whittling, creating small animals from scraps of wood he found in Harrison's kindling box. Pete, once his gruff exterior cracked, proved to have a dry wit that kept everyone laughing. Harrison moved through it all with quiet competence, checking the fire, making sure the animals in the barn had enough feed and water, rationing their supplies to ensure they would not run short if the storm lasted longer than expected. Violet watched him and saw not just the grieving widower but the natural leader, the man who carried responsibility lightly because he had been doing it his entire adult life. On the second night, as the storm showed no signs of abating, Tommy pulled out a harmonica and began to play. The music was simple but lovely, mountain melodies that spoke of loneliness and longing, of hope deferred but not abandoned. Harrison surprised everyone by joining in with a deep, rich voice that transformed the simple tunes into something transcendent. "I did not know you could sing," Violet said when he paused between songs. "Alina taught me," Harrison replied, his expression distant. "She said every person had music in them, even if they thought they did not. She could play the guitar, and we would sit on the porch on summer evenings and play together. I have not sung since she died. It seemed wrong somehow to make music when she was not there to hear it." "She would want you to keep singing," Violet said with certainty. "Music is not about being heard. It is about expressing what words cannot contain. Your grief, your memories, your hope for something better, all of that belongs in song as much as joy does." Harrison's dark eyes met hers across the firelit room, and something passed between them, a recognition that went deeper than words. "Sing with me," he said quietly. "I think our voices would fit together." And they did. Violet's clear soprano wound around Harrison's baritone in harmonies that seemed effortless, as though they had been singing together for years. The ranch hands listened in respectful silence, and when the songs finally ended, Frank cleared his throat roughly and announced he was checking on the horses, though everyone knew he simply needed a moment to compose himself. The storm broke on the 3rd day, the clouds parting to reveal a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The world was buried under 4 feet of snow, drifts reaching 8 and 10 feet where the wind had piled them against buildings. The temperature had dropped well below zero, and breath frosted immediately in the crystalline air. It took 2 full days to dig out, everyone working together to clear paths between the buildings, to make sure the animals were safe and the water sources accessible. Violet found herself wielding a shovel alongside the men, ignoring their protests that it was too hard for a woman, proving with every scoop that necessity made everyone equal on a mountain ranch. By the time they finally made it into Alta a week after the storm, the town was buzzing with similar stories of survival and shared hardship. Mrs. Chen welcomed Violet back with unusual warmth, declaring that anyone who could make it through that storm without falling apart was clearly made of stern enough stuff for mountain living. Christmas approached with the strange compression of time that comes from being snowbound, days blending together in a rhythm of work and rest, meals and music. Violet had been secretly working on gifts during her evening hours, using scraps from her mending projects to create something special for each person. For Frank, a tobacco pouch embroidered with his initials. For Tommy, a replacement vest to match the one she had mended, made from fabric she had bought with her first earnings. For Pete, a warm scarf in colors that would not show dirt. And for Harrison, she had saved the last of her mother's fine linen to make him 3 new shirts, each one carefully fitted to his frame, each stitch placed with meticulous care. Harrison disappeared into Alta 2 days before Christmas, returning with mysterious bundles that he hid in his room. On Christmas morning, he presented her with a sewing cabinet, handmade from rich walnut wood, with dozens of small drawers and compartments for organizing thread and needles, scissors and patterns. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every joint perfect, every surface smooth as silk. "I had Mr. Larson the carpenter make it," Harrison explained as Violet ran her fingers over the beautiful wood, tears streaming down her face. "I described what I thought you might need, and he created this. If it is not right, if you need different drawers or different spacing, he said he could modify it." "It is perfect," Violet whispered. "It is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me. Harrison, I do not know what to say." "Say you will stay," Harrison replied, his voice low and intense. "Not just through the winter, but longer. Say you will consider making the ranch your permanent home, building your business here, becoming part of this life I am trying to rebuild." Violet looked up at him, at the hope and fear mingled in his dark eyes, at the vulnerability he was offering her. "I am staying," she said firmly. "This feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has. You feel like home." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Harrison took a step closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses. "Violet, I know it has only been 2 months. I know it is too soon by any rational measure. But I have to tell you that somewhere in these weeks of cooking together and talking together and weathering storms together, I have fallen in love with you. You have brought light back into this house, back into my life. You make me want to sing again, to hope again, to believe that happiness is possible after loss." "Harrison," Violet covered his hand with hers, holding it against her cheek. "I love you too. I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was too fast, too complicated, that I was confusing gratitude with affection. But that is not what this is. When I am with you, I feel seen in a way I never have before. You understand my losses without trying to fix them or minimize them. You respect my strength while allowing me to be vulnerable. You make me laugh and think and feel safe all at once. That is not gratitude. That is love." Harrison bent his head slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Violet rose on her toes to meet him halfway. Their first kiss was tender and searching, a question and an answer all at once. His lips were warm and soft, tasting faintly of the coffee they had shared that morning, and Violet felt something inside her chest that had been locked tight for years finally, gently, open. When they broke apart, Harrison rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly, give you time to be certain, let you know every day how much you mean to me. I want to marry you, Violet, but only when you are ready, only when you are sure." "I am sure now," Violet said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "But I would like the courting anyway. I would like to have the experience of being loved openly and honorably, without shame or secrecy. I would like to stand beside you in Alta and have people know that we chose each other freely and honestly." So they courted, despite living under the same roof, despite the obvious love that anyone with eyes could see between them. Harrison brought her wildflowers he found on his rides through the canyon, little bouquets of mountain blooms that should not have been blooming in the deep snow, but somehow were. He left her notes, simple messages written in his careful hand, telling her she was beautiful or thanking her for mending his favorite shirt, or simply saying he was glad she had come to Alta. Violet responded with small gestures of her own, baking his favorite foods, making sure his coffee was ready when he came in from morning chores, embroidering his initials on handkerchiefs she tucked into his coat pockets. They walked together when the weather allowed, Harrison showing her the boundaries of his land, the places Alina had loved, the future plans he had for expanding the horse breeding operation. "I want to focus on mountain horses," he explained as they stood on a ridge overlooking the ranch. "Animals that can handle the altitude and the cold, that are sure-footed on rough terrain. There is a market for them with the mining operations and the ranches down in the valleys. I think I could build something lasting, something to pass down to our children if we are blessed with any." Our children. The words made Violet's heart skip. "You want more children?" "Even after losing Lily, I want children with you," Harrison clarified. "I will not lie and say I am not afraid. The thought of going through that again, of losing you the way I lost Alina, it terrifies me. But I also know that fear is not a reason to avoid love, to avoid building a family. Life is uncertain, Violet. People die, storms come, mines collapse, accidents happen. But in between all that uncertainty, there is also joy and connection and the simple daily miracle of waking up beside someone you love. I want that with you. I want all of it, including the fear." "I want it too," Violet said, taking his hand. "And I am scared as well. But we will face those fears together. That makes all the difference." They announced their engagement in late January, and Mrs. Chen immediately began planning a wedding celebration. Despite Violet's protests that something simple would be sufficient, the entire town seemed determined to make the event memorable. Mrs. Johnson offered to make the cake, a 3-layer affair that would feed half of Alta. Mr. Patterson donated fabric for Violet's dress, fine ivory silk that had come in on the train from Denver. Even Krusty Pete revealed a hidden talent for carpentry, working with Frank to build an arbor for the ceremony. Violet made her own wedding dress, working on it in stolen hours when Harrison was out with the horses, each stitch a meditation on the unexpected path her life had taken. The design was simple but elegant, with long sleeves and a high collar suitable for a mountain winter wedding, the bodice fitted and the skirt flowing. She embroidered tiny violets along the collar and cuffs, a subtle acknowledgement of her own name and the flower that bloomed in snow. They were married on a brilliant February morning, the sky painfully blue, the mountains gleaming white against the horizon. The ceremony took place at the ranch, on the very porch Alina had designed, with what seemed like the entire population of Alta crowded into the space. Frank stood up as Harrison's best man, his weathered face solemn with the weight of the moment. Mrs. Chen stood with Violet, her presence a benediction and a blessing. The minister from Alta's small church kept the service short, acknowledging that standing outside in February, even in bright sunshine, was a test of everyone's dedication. But when Harrison took Violet's hands and spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure, carrying across the assembled witnesses with the weight of absolute truth. "I vow to love you in joy and in sorrow, in plenty and in want, in sickness and in health. I vow to respect your strength and cherish your vulnerability. I vow to be your partner in all things, to share the burdens and the celebrations equally. I vow to remember every day how lucky I am that the train brought you to Alta, and that you trusted me enough to stay." Violet's vows were equally heartfelt. "I vow to mend what is torn and broken, starting with hearts and moving outward to encompass this ranch, this life we are building together. I vow to face the future with courage, knowing that fear is not a reason to stop loving or hoping or trying. I vow to sing with you on summer evenings and weather storms beside you in winter. I vow to be your home, as you have become mine." When the minister pronounced them married, Harrison kissed her with a tenderness that made several of the watching miners clear their throats roughly. And as everyone filed into the house for the celebration Mrs. Chen had orchestrated, Violet felt a peace settle over her that she had never known before, a sense of rightness that came from being exactly where she was meant to be. The wedding feast was abundant despite winter's restrictions, with roasted venison and potatoes, fresh bread and preserved vegetables, and Mrs. Johnson's magnificent cake. Tommy played his harmonica while several miners produced fiddles and guitars, and soon the furniture was pushed back to allow for dancing. Harrison led Violet through a waltz, their movements synchronized despite neither of them being experienced dancers, their bodies understanding what their feet fumbled. "Happy," Harrison murmured against her hair as they turned slowly to the music. "Happier than I thought possible," Violet replied honestly. "6 months ago I was terrified and alone, stepping off a train into the unknown. Now I am home." The celebration lasted until nearly midnight, with guests finally departing into the frigid night with promises to visit soon and invitations for spring gatherings. Frank and the other hands discreetly retreated to the bunkhouse, giving the newlyweds privacy in the ranch house for the first time since the winter storms had begun. Harrison led Violet upstairs, his hand warm around hers, his dark eyes tender. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly. "A little," Violet admitted. "My only experience was with someone who did not truly love me, who left when things became difficult. This feels entirely different." "It is different," Harrison assured her. "We are building something together, Violet. Nothing about this has to be rushed or uncomfortable. We have the rest of our lives to learn each other." And they did learn, slowly and sweetly, discovering the geography of each other's bodies with patient care, finding joy in the simple intimacy of shared breath and tangled limbs. Harrison was gentle but not tentative, confident but not presumptuous, always attentive to Violet's responses, always making sure she felt cherished and safe. When they finally joined together completely, Violet felt tears slip down her cheeks, overwhelmed by the realization that this was what love was supposed to feel like. This partnership of equals, this mutual vulnerability and trust. Afterward, they lay wrapped in quilts, the fire burning low in the bedroom hearth, talking in quiet voices about everything and nothing. Harrison traced patterns on Violet's bare shoulder, his touch feather light and wondering. "I never thought I would feel this again," he confessed. "After Alina died, I was certain that part of my life was over, that I had used up my allotment of happiness. But you proved me wrong. You showed me that the heart has infinite capacity, that loving again does not diminish what came before but adds to it, creates something new and equally precious." "Alina would be happy for you," Violet said with certainty. "A woman who loved you enough to sacrifice herself for your child would not want you to spend the rest of your life alone. She would want this for you, this second chance at joy." "I think so too," Harrison agreed. "And I think she would have liked you. You have the same fierce determination, the same refusal to let circumstances define your worth." They fell asleep tangled together, secure in the warmth of the house and each other, while outside the mountain night settled deep and cold, stars blazing in the thin air. Winter loosened its grip slowly, March arriving with alternating storms and thaws that turned the ranch into a muddy challenge. But Violet found joy in the changing season, in watching the snow recede to reveal brown grass that would soon green, in seeing the first brave wildflowers push through the soggy ground. Her sewing business continued to thrive, with customers from Alta and even some of the surrounding ranches seeking her skills. In late March, Violet realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she tried not to hope too much, remembering how quickly hope had turned to heartbreak before. But as April arrived and still her courses did not come, as her breasts grew tender and her stomach occasionally rebelled against breakfast, she could no longer deny the possibility. She told Harrison on an evening when the spring sunset painted the mountains gold and crimson, when the air was finally warm enough to sit on the porch without a coat. He had been talking about his plans for breeding the horses this season, and she waited for a pause in his enthusiastic description before speaking. "Harrison, I need to tell you something. I am fairly certain I am pregnant." He went very still, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, and Violet felt fear clutch her heart, wondering if she had been wrong to think he was ready for this, if the memories of Alina and Lily were too painful to allow him to feel joy at this news. Then his face crumbled, and tears began to stream down his weathered cheeks. "Violet, are you certain? As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." Harrison pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his whole body shaking with emotion. "I am terrified," he confessed against her hair. "I am absolutely terrified, but I am also happier than I have any right to be. We are going to have a child, Violet, our child." "We are," Violet confirmed, her own tears flowing freely now. "I am scared too, Harrison, but we will face this together just as we have faced everything else." They held each other as the sunset faded to twilight, as the stars emerged one by one overhead, making promises and plans, acknowledging fears and celebrating hopes. Harrison insisted on taking her to the doctor in Alta the very next morning, and Dr. Morrison confirmed what Violet already knew. She was approximately 2 months pregnant, healthy and strong, with every reason to expect a normal pregnancy and delivery. "But we will monitor you closely," Dr. Morrison said seriously. "Given your history and your husband's loss, I want to see you every 2 weeks. Any problems, any concerns, you come to me immediately. And when your time comes, I will be there. I promise you that." Harrison held Violet's hand throughout the examination and the consultation, his grip tight but steady. As they left the doctor's office, he stopped on the street, framing her face with his hands. "Whatever happens, we face it together. If anything goes wrong, if we have to make choices, you come first. Always. Do you understand?" "Nothing is going to go wrong," Violet said firmly. "I am healthy. The pregnancy is progressing normally, and I have you beside me. That makes all the difference." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer, Violet's body adapting to the changes with surprising ease. She continued her sewing work, though Harrison fretted constantly about her doing too much, insisting she rest frequently and eat more than she thought necessary. Mrs. Chen visited weekly, bringing food and advice, sharing stories of the many births she had attended over her years in Alta. Frank and the ranch hands treated Violet like fragile glass, despite her protests that she was pregnant, not dying. In late June, as Violet entered her 7th month, Harrison took her up to the hilltop where Alina and Lily were buried. The graves were well tended, the markers simple but carefully carved. He had brought wildflowers, which he placed on both stones before stepping back to stand beside Violet. "I wanted to tell them," he said quietly. About the baby, about you, about how life has continued in ways I never expected. I wanted them to know they are not forgotten, that they will always be part of this family, but that we are building something new as well. Violet rested her head against his shoulder, one hand on her swelling belly where the baby was currently doing acrobatics. "Tell them," she encouraged. "I think they are listening." So Harrison spoke to the Graves, telling Alina about Violet's strength and kindness, about how she had brought joy back into the ranch house. He told Lily about the baby coming, about how she would always be the first daughter even though she had not lived long enough to grow. And Violet added her own words, promising Alina that she would love Harrison with all her heart, promising Lily that the new baby would hear stories about the sister who came before. As they walked back down the hill together, Harrison stopped suddenly, his attention caught by something in the grass. He bent down and then straightened, holding out his hand to show Violet a cluster of tiny purple violets blooming impossibly in the summer heat. "Your flowers," he said with wonder, "blooming when they should not, proving winter wrong, proving that life continues," Violet corrected, taking one of the delicate blossoms. "That joy can follow sorrow, that new love does not erase old love but stands beside it, that families can be rebuilt even after they have been shattered." The baby came in early October, on a morning so bright and clear, it seemed impossible that anything difficult could happen. But labor proved long and arduous, testing Violet's strength and Harrison's nerves. Dr. Morrison stayed throughout, his presence steady and reassuring, and Mrs. Chen arrived to help, her experienced hands and calm voice guiding Violet through the worst of the pain. Harrison refused to leave the room, despite Dr. Morrison's suggestion that he might prefer to wait downstairs. He held Violet's hand through every contraction, wiped the sweat from her face, whispered encouragement when she was certain she could not continue. And when the baby finally emerged with a lusty cry that echoed through the house, when Dr. Morrison announced it was a healthy boy, Harrison wept openly, his tears falling onto Violet's exhausted face. "A son," he managed through his tears. "We have a son, Violet, and you are alive. You both are alive." They named him Henry, after no one in particular, simply because they both loved the name's solid, dependable sound. Henry Xavier proved to be a vigorous baby, with dark hair like his father and bright blue eyes that might or might not change. He nursed eagerly and slept poorly, keeping both parents exhausted but grateful. The ranch hands competed for the privilege of holding him, even rough Pete developing a surprising gentleness when Henry was placed in his arms. Mrs. Chen brought gifts and advice, and the families of Alta stopped by in a steady stream, welcoming the newest member of their community. Violet recovered quickly, her youth and strength serving her well. Within a month, she was back to her sewing, though now she worked with Henry sleeping in a cradle beside her work table, the rhythm of her needle accompanied by his soft snores. Harrison was a devoted father, waking for night feedings, walking the floor when Henry was fussy, changing diapers without complaint. "I missed all of this with Lily," he explained when Violet protested that he needed to rest. "I held her, but she was so weak, so fragile. I was afraid to do anything but cradle her gently. With Henry, I can be a real father. I can do all the work and experience all the joy. I will not miss a moment of it." The first year of Henry's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and joyful days, of watching him grow and change, of celebrating every milestone as though it were a miracle. He cut his first tooth, rolled over, sat up, babbled his first sounds. By his first birthday, he was pulling himself up on furniture, cruising around the main room with determined concentration, clearly preparing to walk. Violet's sewing business continued to flourish, and she began training a young woman from Alta who wanted to learn the trade, passing on the skills her mother had taught her. Harrison's horse breeding operation expanded, his reputation for quality mountain horses spreading throughout the territory. The ranch prospered, and with prosperity came the ability to plan for the future. On Henry's first birthday, with half of Alta crowded into the ranch house for the celebration, Harrison made an announcement. "Violet and I have been discussing the future," he said, his arm around her waist, Henry balanced on his hip. "We want to build something that will last, something our children and grandchildren can inherit. So we have decided to expand the ranch, to buy the adjoining property from the Stevens family who are moving back east. We will double our grazing land and water access, which will allow us to support twice as many horses." The announcement was met with enthusiastic approval, and the party continued late into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. But later, when the guests had finally departed and Henry was asleep in his cradle, Violet and Harrison stood on the porch together, looking out at the moonlit mountains. "Our children," Violet repeated softly. "You said children, plural. Are you hoping for more?" "I am hoping for whatever we are blessed with," Harrison replied, pulling her close. "More children would be wonderful, but I would be equally happy if Henry is our only one. You and he are enough, Violet. You are more than I ever dared to hope for." But they were blessed with more. 18 months after Henry's birth, Violet delivered a daughter they named Rose, for the baby Violet had lost and for the hope that bloomed eternal. And 2 years after Rose came another son whom they named James. The ranch house, once too quiet and too large, now rang with children's laughter and the chaos of a growing family. Through it all, Violet continued her sewing, the work grounding her, connecting her to the women of Alta who depended on her skills. She trained 3 more apprentices over the years, young women who wanted to learn a trade that could support them through mountain winters and uncertain times. Her reputation spread beyond Alta, and she received commissions from as far away as Salt Lake City and Denver. Harrison's horse operation became one of the most respected in the territory, his animals prized for their sure-footedness and stamina. He hired more hands as the business grew, building additional barns and corrals, expanding the ranch in careful increments that never strained their resources or their land. The children grew healthy and strong, shaped by mountain air and loving parents, by a community that embraced them and land that challenged them. Henry proved serious and thoughtful, interested in horses and ranching from his earliest years. Rose was fierce and determined, refusing to accept limitations based on her gender, insisting on learning to ride and work cattle alongside her brothers. James, the baby, was creative and musical, with his father's voice and his mother's eye for beauty. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harrison took Violet back to the hilltop where Alina and Lily rested. The graves were still well tended, the markers weathered now but sturdy. The children played nearby, Henry showing Rose and James the best places to find wildflowers, their voices bright in the mountain air. "I wanted to thank them," Harrison said, standing before the graves with Violet's hand in his, "for making me who I was when you arrived. If I had not loved Alina, if I had not lost her and Lily, I would not have been the man standing on that train platform, lonely enough and desperate enough to offer a home to a stranger. Their love taught me how to love. Their loss taught me not to take a single moment for granted. Everything I have with you, everything we have built, stands on the foundation they helped create. They gave you the capacity to recognize what mattered," Violet agreed, "to see past conventional expectations to what was real and true. I am grateful to them, even as I am grateful for you." As they walked back down the hill, their children running ahead, Violet thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The train arriving in Alta on that November day 10 years ago, carrying a seamstress seeking work, and finding instead a lonely cowboy who offered everything in exchange for mending his heart. The unexpected courtship, the winter storms weathered together, the gradual building of trust and love. The fear and joy of pregnancy, the terror and triumph of birth, the slow construction of a family and a legacy. "Tell me what you are thinking," Harrison said, noticing her thoughtful expression. "I am thinking about mending," Violet replied. "About how I came here to mend clothes and ended up mending so much more. Your heart, yes, but also my own. The broken places inside me that I thought would always hurt, they have healed. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough that I can look at our children and feel joy instead of loss, enough that I can think about the baby I lost without being crushed by grief." "We mended each other," Harrison said. "That is what love does, I think. It does not erase the damage or pretend the pain never happened. It just makes the broken places part of the story instead of the end of it." 20 years after Violet first stepped off the train in Alta, she and Harrison stood on their porch watching the sunset, their grown children scattered across the territory but never far from home. Henry managed the ranch now, with his father's steady hand and his mother's practical wisdom. Rose had married a doctor in Salt Lake City, but returned frequently with her own children. James studied music in Denver but came home every summer to help with the horses and fill the house with song. The ranch had prospered beyond their early dreams, but more than that, it had become an anchor point for their extended family, for the community of Alta that had embraced them. Violet's sewing room, though she worked less frequently now, still welcomed young women seeking to learn the trade. Harrison's horses remained the standard by which others were judged throughout the territory. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked, echoing the question he had posed so long ago about her first love. "Coming to Alta, accepting my strange offer, building this life in the mountains." Violet looked at the view that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat, at the house that had transformed from shelter to home, at the man beside her whose hand still fit perfectly in hers after 2 decades. "I regret nothing. Every choice, every challenge, every moment of fear and joy led to this. To us. To the family we built and the love we share. The train brought me here seeking work, and you offered to provide everything else if I would mend your heart. But what we created together was so much more than that simple transaction. We built a life, Harrison, a beautiful, complicated, perfectly imperfect life." "We did," Harrison agreed, pulling her close, "and I would not change a single day of it." As the sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they stood together in the home they had built from loss and hope, from courage and trust, from the simple but profound truth that love was not a single moment, but a series of choices, made daily, to see and honor and cherish the person beside you. The train had brought a seamstress seeking work. The cowboy had said, "Mend my heart, I will provide everything else." And together, they had created something neither could have imagined alone, a love story written in stitches and scars, in children and horses, in mountain seasons and enduring devotion, a happily ever after earned through faith and work, and the infinite capacity of the human heart to heal.